Mark thought his marriage was perfect, until a small slip revealed his wife Claire's devastating betrayal. As he unravels the lies surrounding her secret life, Mark's heartbreak turns to determination. Armed with proof of her affair, he sets out to protect his children, expose the truth, and reclaim his life. But when a shocking revelation about his son's paternity surfaces, Mark must confront the ultimate question: can love endure even the deepest betrayals? This gripping tale of love, loss, and resilience will keep you guessing until the very end. The house was quiet, save for the faint hum of the dishwasher running in the kitchen. Claire had left early that morning for another one of her work trips, kissing me on the cheek as she always did, but this time the gesture felt hollow. I couldn't put my finger on why, but something in her demeanor lately felt off. Her laughter had become more forced, her stories about her day thinner. We had been married for over a decade, and while the passion of the early years had naturally mellowed, I always thought of our bond as unshakable. But for the last few months, shadows had crept into the corners of our lives, subtle but insidious. A stray comment here, a secretive glance there, nothing I could outright call suspicious but enough to gnaw at the edges of my peace. It wasn't until last Thursday morning that my suspicions turned into something tangible. Claire had called me early, the usual calm in her voice replaced by a strained urgency. "My purse was stolen last night at the hotel lobby," she said. "Can you cancel the credit cards? I've already informed my boss, and she's helping arrange replacements." I nodded along, reassured her I'd handle it, but something about the call didn't sit right. Claire was usually meticulous, never careless with her belongings. Why now? And why the hotel lobby of all places? I brushed the doubts aside, chalking them up to paranoia, and dutifully cancelled the cards. The next day, while tidying up the house, I stumbled across her fidelity account statement. We had always kept our finances semi-separate, respecting each other's privacy, but this document wasn't tucked away, it was sitting on the desk in plain sight, as though it wanted to be found. I wasn't snooping, but I couldn't resist taking a peek. After all, this was the same account she had funded with an inheritance from her parents. The balance was healthy, over $400,000, but what caught my attention was a withdrawal of $3,000 marked just days after the stolen purse incident. The payee was a local jewelry store. My pulse quickened. Why would Claire, who hadn't mentioned replacing her lost rings, make such a purchase? She hadn't bought anything for me or talked about gifting anyone else jewelry. The dots refused to connect. That night, I decided to dig deeper. While she slept, I retrieved her phone and scrolled through it. Nothing seemed amiss, no suspicious texts, no strange apps. But Claire was clever. If she was hiding something, she wouldn't make it easy for me to find. The effort left me both relieved and frustrated, and I told myself I was overthinking things. Still, the gnawing doubt lingered. It wasn't just the purse or the money, it was the shift in her behavior. The increased frequency of her work trips. The way her laughter at my jokes seemed more obligatory than genuine. The passion in our relationship had cooled long ago, but now even the embers seemed cold. A week later, my chance came. She left her phone charging in the kitchen while she showered. A text lit up the screen, a message from Nick, her new colleague. "Miss you already. Can't wait until next time." The message struck me like a punch to the gut. My hands trembled as I unlocked her phone. Their conversation wasn't overly incriminating, but the undertone was unmistakable. Inside jokes. Compliments. Little details about their shared work trips. They were breadcrumbs, leading to a truth I wasn't ready to face. I didn't confront her immediately. Instead, I took a page from my old college days and got practical. I installed a tracking app on her phone and activated it while she was out of the room. It would run in the background, invisible to her, and provide me with the answers I needed. The results were immediate. Over the next 2 weeks, I watched as Claire's so-called work trips often ended at a secluded cabin 2 hours outside the city. Each time she left, she'd tell me she was off to some dull conference or client meeting, only to spend hours at this cabin before returning home late, flushed and overly cheerful. The lies stung, but what hurt more was the ease with which she told them. The final confirmation came when I called the jewelry store she had visited. Posing as her concerned husband, I asked about the $3,000 purchase. The store clerk was all too happy to help, mentioning how distressed my wife had seemed while replacing her stolen wedding and engagement rings. But Claire still wore her original rings every day, rings I had given her on our wedding day. If she hadn't bought replacements for herself, then who were they for? That night, as she lay next to me, I stared at the ceiling, my mind a whirlwind of anger and disbelief. It wasn't just the affair that crushed me, it was the sheer audacity. The calm confidence with which she lied. The quiet erosion of trust that she'd engineered piece by piece, like a craftsman dismantling a monument. Claire had no idea I knew. But she would. Soon. Claire was radiant as ever the following morning, a stark contrast to the turmoil brewing inside me. She hummed a cheerful tune while making coffee, her movements fluid and unburdened. To the outside world, she was the perfect wife, polished, charming, utterly composed. But I knew better now. I saw the cracks in the facade. The night before had been sleepless, spent reviewing every moment of our marriage with the cold clarity of hindsight. Every late night at the office, every hastily planned work trip, it all seemed so obvious now. The pieces fell into place, forming a picture I could no longer ignore. Coffee? Claire's voice was bright as she handed me a mug. I accepted it, my face an unreadable mask. I wasn't ready to confront her yet. Not without a plan. Not without solid evidence that she couldn't wriggle out of. Thanks, I murmured, sipping the hot brew and watching her out of the corner of my eye. She was too calm. Too happy. How long had she been lying to me? How long had she been perfecting this double life? As the days passed, I threw myself into gathering proof. The tracking app on her phone continued to provide breadcrumbs, marking her trips to the cabin with uncanny regularity. My suspicions about Nick solidified as I noted patterns. His name came up in passing conversations, his presence always conveniently overlapping with her absences. But I needed more. A smoking gun. One evening, after Claire left for a girls' night out, I found myself sitting in front of the computer, scrolling through forums and advice columns. If I wanted answers, I would have to dig deeper. I reached out to a private investigator, explaining my situation in brief, clipped tones. The PI, a gruff but understanding man named Harris, promised results. People like your wife, they always slip up, he said. They think they're clever, but they're not. Give me a week, and I'll have something concrete. A week. It felt like an eternity. While Harris worked, I played my part. I smiled through dinner conversations, nodded along as Claire regaled me with stories about her work. I even feigned interest when she described a particularly tedious meeting with Nick, her voice lilting as she mentioned how competent and charming he was. Every word was a dagger, but I swallowed my anger and waited. The turning point came on a Saturday morning. Claire was unusually giddy as she prepared for yet another trip, this time a weekend retreat with her colleagues. She kissed me on the cheek and promised to call every evening, her tone light and carefree. I watched her leave, my heart a stone in my chest. Hours later, Harris called. You were right, he said, his voice grim. I've got everything you need. He sent me a file, a compilation of photographs, receipts, and timestamps. There she was, hand in hand with Nick, entering the cabin I'd tracked her to. There she was again, laughing as they shared drinks on the porch, their faces inches apart. And there was the clincher, a candid shot of them locked in an embrace, oblivious to the world around them. I stared at the screen, my chest tightening with rage. The proof was irrefutable. She couldn't deny this. She couldn't spin it or blame it on a misunderstanding. For the first time in weeks, I felt a grim sense of clarity. That night, as I tucked the kids into bed, Claire called. Her voice was warm, affectionate, the perfect mask of a devoted wife. "How's everything at home?" she asked. "I miss you." "Fine," I said, keeping my tone even. "We miss you too." It took every ounce of restraint not to confront her then and there. But I wanted her home. I wanted her to see the evidence, to face the truth she had so carefully avoided. The next day, I set my plan into motion. I gathered everything, the photographs, the receipts, the tracking data. I printed them out and laid them neatly on the dining room table, a silent display of her betrayal. When Claire returned that evening, she was all smiles. She dropped her bags by the door and breezed into the house, her voice filled with cheer as she called for the kids. But when she saw me sitting at the table, her smile faltered. "What's this?" she asked, her gaze flickering to the papers in front of me. I didn't answer immediately. Instead, I gestured for her to sit. She hesitated, her cheerful facade cracking under the weight of my silence. "Claire," I began, my voice steady, "we need to talk." The color drained from her face. For the first time in weeks, I saw a flicker of fear in her eyes. She opened her mouth to speak, but I cut her off. "Don't," I said, sliding the photographs across the table. "Don't lie to me. Not anymore." Her hands trembled as she picked up the pictures, her eyes scanning the evidence of her infidelity. When she looked up at me, her expression was a mix of shock and defiance. "Where did you get these?" she demanded, her voice shaking. "That doesn't matter," I replied. "What matters is the truth. How long has this been going on, Claire? How long have you been lying to me?" For a moment, she didn't answer. She stared at the table, her face pale. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, she said, "I didn't mean for this to happen." The words hung in the air like a poison. I leaned back in my chair, my hands gripping the edges of the table. "You didn't mean for this to happen?" I repeated, my voice rising. "You didn't mean to lie to me? To betray me? To throw away everything we built?" Her silence was deafening. And in that silence, I knew the truth, I had been living with a stranger. The woman I thought I knew, the woman I had trusted with my heart, was gone. And in her place was someone I no longer recognized. The conversation ended with a single sentence, "We're done." Claire's pleas for forgiveness fell on deaf ears. I had made up my mind. The next steps were clear. This wasn't just about revenge, it was about taking back control of my life. The house was eerily silent the next morning. Claire had slept in the guest room after our confrontation, but I doubted she got any sleep. I hadn't. My mind churned all night, replaying our conversation, her excuses, and the raw reality of her betrayal. The kids, thankfully, were unaware of the storm brewing under their roof. They went about their morning routine, chatting about school and their weekend plans. I forced a smile and packed their lunches, determined to keep things as normal as possible for their sake. Claire emerged from the guest room looking haggard. Her usual polished appearance was absent, replaced by puffy eyes and unkempt hair. She tried to meet my gaze but faltered under the weight of my cold stare. "We need to talk," she said softly, her voice cracking. "I've said everything I needed to," I replied curtly, grabbing my keys. "Take the day to figure out what you're going to tell the kids. Because I'm not lying for you." With that, I left the house, needing space to think. The walls felt too small, too suffocating, with her still inside. I drove aimlessly for hours, the image of her with Nick burned into my mind. Her betrayal wasn't just a one-time mistake, it was calculated, repeated, and deliberate. I ended up at Harris's office, the private investigator who had uncovered the truth. He greeted me with a knowing nod, his expression a mix of sympathy and professionalism. "How are you holding up?" he asked, gesturing for me to sit. Not great, I admitted. But I need your help with one more thing. Harris leaned forward, listening intently as I outlined my plan. This wasn't just about exposing Claire to me anymore. It was about ensuring that when I walked away, I had everything I needed to protect myself and the kids. I need to know everything about Nick, I said firmly. Where he works, who he's married to, if he is, and anything else that will give me leverage. Harris nodded, his expression serious. Consider it done. As I left his office, I felt a grim sense of determination. This wasn't about revenge for revenge's sake. It was about dismantling the life Claire had built on lies and ensuring that the fallout didn't consume my children or me. Back home, Claire was waiting for me in the living room. She stood as I entered, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. For a moment, we just stared at each other, the weight of our shared history hanging between us. I want to explain, she began, her voice trembling. I raised a hand to stop her. No more lies, Claire. Just tell me why. Tears welled in her eyes as she sank back into the couch. I don't know, she said after a long pause. I guess I felt invisible. You've always been so busy, so focused on work and the kids. I felt like I was just a part of the background. Her words hit me like a slap. I had worked tirelessly to provide for our family, to ensure we had everything we needed. And this was how she repaid me. By seeking validation from another man. I never stopped loving you, she continued, her voice breaking. But I felt like I wasn't enough for you anymore. Enough? I spat, the anger bubbling to the surface. You weren't enough for me. I've given you everything, Claire. A home, a family, trust. And you threw it all away because you felt neglected? Do you have any idea what you've done? Her sobs filled the room, but I felt no sympathy. Her tears were too little, too late. She had made her choice, and now she had to live with the consequences. I want to fix this, she said through her tears. I'll do whatever it takes. There's no fixing this, I replied, my voice cold. This marriage is over. The only thing left is figuring out how to make the separation as painless as possible for the kids. Claire's face crumpled, but I didn't waver. I had made up my mind. Trust, once shattered, couldn't be pieced back together. And even if it could, I didn't want to. Over the next few days, I began the process of untangling our lives. I met with a lawyer, presenting the evidence Harris had gathered, and outlined my goals: full custody of the kids, the house, and a clean break from Claire. My lawyer was optimistic, given the strength of my case and the irrefutable proof of her infidelity. Meanwhile, Harris delivered on his promise. Nick, it turned out, was married with 2 young children of his own. His wife, a stay-at-home mom, had no idea about the affair. Armed with this information, I made a decision. One evening, while Claire was out of the house, I dialed Nick's home number. His wife answered, her voice cheerful and unsuspecting. Hi, I began, my voice steady. You don't know me, but I think we need to talk. It's about your husband and my wife. The silence on the other end of the line was deafening. Then, a quiet, shaky, "What are you talking about?" I explained everything, carefully but honestly, and sent her the evidence Harris had compiled. By the time we hung up, she was in tears, her world shattered much like mine had been. It wasn't revenge, it was justice. Nick deserved to face the consequences of his actions, just as Claire did. The fallout was swift. Nick's wife confronted him, and their marriage imploded. The affair, once a carefully guarded secret, was now the talk of their social circles and workplace. Claire, too, faced the consequences at work as whispers of her indiscretion spread. But I felt no satisfaction. No joy. Only a hollow sense of relief that I had done what needed to be done. This wasn't about getting even, it was about reclaiming my life and protecting my children from the chaos Claire and Nick had created. As I packed my things to leave the house for good, Claire approached me one last time. Her eyes were red from crying, her expression one of utter defeat. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "For everything." I paused, the weight of her words sinking in. "I hope you mean that," I replied. "For your sake, and for the kids. Because they deserve better than what you've given them." And with that, I walked out the door, ready to start over. Ready to rebuild. The weeks following my departure were a whirlwind of adjustments. Moving into a small rental house, juggling the kids' routines, and navigating the early stages of divorce proceedings left little time to dwell on emotions. The pain of betrayal still lingered, but I found solace in the moments of normalcy I could provide for Emma and Liam. Claire, to her credit, didn't fight me on custody. Whether out of guilt or defeat, she agreed to the arrangement without argument, leaving the house and its memories to the kids and me. She moved into a modest apartment on the other side of town, keeping her distance. Nick's downfall at work and the implosion of his marriage had effectively ended their affair, and Claire was now, for all intents and purposes, alone. Life slowly settled into a new rhythm. I buried myself in work and focused on creating a stable home for the kids. Each day brought small victories, a genuine laugh from Emma, a hug from Liam, or even just a quiet evening where we all felt like a family again. But just as the dust began to settle, life threw me a curveball. It started with a letter. Delivered in a plain white envelope, it was addressed to me in Claire's handwriting. At first, I considered tossing it aside. What more could she possibly have to say? But curiosity got the better of me, and I opened it. "Dear Mark. I know I have no right to ask anything of you, not after what I've done. But I need you to hear me out. Please. Just once. There's something I need to tell you, something I should have told you a long time ago. It's about Liam. I've been carrying this secret for years, and it's time you knew the truth. He's not your son." I froze, the words blurring before my eyes. My heart pounded in my chest as I read and reread the sentence, hoping I had misunderstood. But there it was, in stark black ink, a confession that turned my world upside down. "Before you came into my life, there was someone else. A brief, reckless relationship that ended before we met. When I found out I was pregnant, I convinced myself it didn't matter. You loved me, and I knew you'd love Liam, too. And you have. You've been the best father he could ever ask for. But the truth is, Liam's biological father is someone else. I never thought this would come to light, but now, with everything that's happened, I couldn't keep lying to you. You deserve to know. Liam deserves to know. Please don't hate me more than you already do. I know this changes everything, but I couldn't carry this secret any longer. Claire." The letter slipped from my hands, fluttering to the floor. A storm of emotions raged inside me, shock, anger, betrayal, and an unexpected surge of protectiveness for Liam. He wasn't my biological son. The thought was like a dagger to the heart. But then I thought about the past 11 years, about the first steps I had cheered for, the bedtime stories, the soccer games. None of that was a lie. I was Liam's father in every way that mattered. That night, I sat with the letter, grappling with what to do. The logical side of me screamed for answers. Who was Liam's biological father? Why had Claire kept this from me for so long? But the emotional side of me whispered a simpler truth: Liam was my son, no matter what the biology said. I decided not to confront Claire right away. Instead, I focused on Liam, determined to make sure he never doubted my love for him. I picked him up from school the next day, took him for ice cream, and spent the evening playing video games. His laughter, so pure and carefree, reminded me of what truly mattered. A week later, Claire called, her voice hesitant. "Did you get my letter?" "I did," I said, keeping my tone measured. "I want to explain," she said, her voice breaking. "Please, Mark. Can we talk? Against my better judgment, I agreed to meet her. We sat across from each other at a coffee shop, the weight of her betrayal heavy between us. Who is he? I asked, cutting straight to the point. Claire hesitated, her hands trembling around her coffee cup. It doesn't matter, she said finally. He's not part of Liam's life. He never has been. That's not good enough, I said firmly. I deserve to know. She sighed, looking down at the table. His name is David. He was a mistake. Someone I thought I loved, but it didn't work out. He left town before Liam was born. I nodded, absorbing her words. I'll need a DNA test, I said. For legal reasons. Claire flinched but agreed. I understand. The test confirmed her claim, and the truth was undeniable, Liam wasn't biologically mine. But it didn't change how I felt about him. He was my son, and nothing would ever change that. Months passed, and the dust began to settle once more. Liam and Emma thrived under my care, and Claire, to her credit, tried to rebuild her relationship with them. It wasn't easy, but I could see she was making an effort. One evening, as I tucked Liam into bed, he looked up at me with wide, curious eyes. Dad, he said, are you mad at Mom? I paused, caught off guard by his question. Why do you ask, buddy? He shrugged. She said she messed up, but you're still my dad, right? The lump in my throat was immediate. I sat down beside him and pulled him into a hug. I'll always be your dad, I said firmly. No matter what. In that moment, I realized something profound. Betrayal may shatter trust, but love, the kind that endures pain, heartbreak, and unimaginable truths, was unbreakable. And that love was what mattered most.